Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 135 for the 5th of Nissan in a leap year. Today we will be beginning a new chapter, chapter 40. But before we get there, I want to talk about a video which I watched in a social psychology class at McGill University back in the day when I was a student there. So one day I get to the class, and this was the school. These type of classes were huge. There were like 800 people. It was like a big auditorium. And so one day the professor said, I'm going to show you guys a video of a group of people throwing a basketball at each other, like playing catch. And it's going to be about a minute long. And I want you guys to pay close attention and notice how many times the ball gets passed from one person to the other. So count and pay attention to this. So we're like, okay, that sounds simple enough. So we start watching the video. And I actually noticed that at a certain point in the video, there were a few people, like again, this room of like 800 students, like several chuckles, just a few, not a lot, not like the whole room, just like a few people chuckling here and there. And so I was counting, like everybody else, I was counting the number of balls, 1, 2, 3, maybe it was like 12 times the ball passed from one hand to the other. And then we got to the end of the video. And then the professor says to us, he said, okay, did everybody count? Do you know how many balls there were? And everybody's nodding. And then he asked another really surprising question. He said, how many people noticed the man in the gorilla suit come up in the middle of the video and start pounding his chest with his hands? And we're like, what? And a few people lifted their hand and they raised their hand. They said, yes, we noticed that. And so most of us, including me, had no idea what this man was talking about. And he showed us the video again, the same video. And it was actually unbelievable to watch. And he said, I promise you guys, this is the exact same video that you just watched. And we watched this video again. And this time, unmistakably, it was very noticeable, right in the middle of the video, this man in a big gorilla suit comes smack into the middle of the video and starts pounding his chest and walks away. And it was really incredible. And it really taught this idea. The whole idea of the video was to teach us this idea of selective attention, of how we have this mechanism in our minds where we cannot and we do not see everything. Our attention is extremely selective. We notice certain things. We don't notice certain things. This is actually a very functional product of our perception, of our minds, of our brain. We actually wouldn't be able to function normally without this mechanism, because when we walk into a room, think about it. It's like we are bombarded with millions of stimuli, like just lots and lots of stimuli. And our brain, in order to function properly, in order for us to move about in the world, we need to be selective with what we see. We need to notice, what am I in the room for? Oh, okay, I need to get that book. I need to get a glass of water, or whatever it is. And that allows us to really narrow our perception in the right way. However, what this experiment really came to illustrate was this idea that our perception is really quite limited. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, more than what we see. And in the case of the experiment, this actually is a very adaptable thing. Like if this was a real research study in the real sense that, let's say we really had to know how many balls were being passed from one person to the other for, I don't know, the sake of, maybe it was like a competitive sport or something like that, maybe to test people's abilities at throwing balls for some kind of psychological experiment, then really we actually would not need to know about the gorilla at all. So it's really not important. However, if we were trying to catch somebody who was in a gorilla suit and find out where this person was, then it would be useful to be able to widen our perception to be able to see that. So perception is a very malleable thing, and it's actually something that we do have a lot of control over, and it can be very selective. That's kind of the bottom line. So why am I bringing this all up, and what does it have to do with what we're going to be learning about in Tanya? So this is, again, one of those longer sections because it is a Wednesday, as we spoke about. The Wednesdays this year have longer sections. So one big topic that we're going to be talking about today is a question that comes up quite a bit in Chassidus, namely the idea that we learn over and over and over in Chassidus that God is everywhere. Hashem is everywhere. He permeates all things. There is no place devoid of God. So if that's truly the case, what does it matter what we do? And what do, especially here, the topic that we've been focusing on is the idea of intention. What difference do our intentions make? Why do we have to work so hard to have the right intention if really God is everywhere? So if we wanted to translate this into the social psychology experiment, is if the man in the gorilla suit is there, why do we have to work? Why do we have to consciously work to see the man in the gorilla suit? Why isn't it just enough for him to be there? And what we will learn about today is, in fact, it is very important. And not only is it very important, but it's actually essential. And that the way God set up the world is in such a way that while it's true that everything is godliness and there is no place that's devoid of him, he is everywhere and in everything and all of that, nevertheless, we don't all perceive this reality. And his flow, the radiance of this reality is not as apparent, equally apparent in all things. And God, the purpose of the world and why God set up the world is that he actually wanted us to perceive it. He wants us to see the man in the gorilla suit, so to speak. Well, in this case, it's not a man in a gorilla suit, but it's godliness. He wants us to hone our perceptions to be able to see this. And we do this through intention. And we'll also learn that our intention, not only does it widen our perception, but it actually widens the channel by which God's radiance can literally pour forth. So it's almost like as if, and this is where it kind of gets kind of magical, like by focusing on that gorilla, the man in the gorilla suit, it's almost like the man in the gorilla suit becomes brighter and actually radiates in a stronger way, in a true way, in an objective kind of way. So I think that's enough of an introduction to get us straight into the text. Again, there's going to be a lot here, so I think we should just get straight into the text, and I'll kind of explain things as I go. So here we go. So chapter 40. So the Alter Rebbe here continues, leaving off from last time where we were talking about this whole idea. Please go back and listen to previous episodes if you haven't already, as always. We've been talking about this idea of what happens if somebody does not have the most ideal intention while they are learning Torah or while they are praying, and how do we rectify this? And we talked about how there are basically, just kind of for context, there are three main different types of intention a person can have when they are engaged in holy service. The first intention is the ideal intention, which is that you're really focused on connecting with God, uniting with God, bringing God's unity to be manifest here in the world and all of that. That's like the ideal place of where we all want to be. Then second level is there's the more neutral intention, which is where we kind of just go about things in a more automatic way. Like, you know, we pray, we learn all these things, but it's habitual. It's just kind of out of habit. We're not necessarily paying the most attention to all the words and everything. It's just kind of neutral. It's kind of like this, we're just going through the motions. And then we have the third level, which is not good intention. It's sort of like a negative intention. This is where somebody learns or prays or whatever it is, and it's for selfish motives. It's for the sake of self-aggrandizement, making themselves be smarter or better, getting honor. So people will say like, oh, wow, look at that Torah scholar, things like that. So, and that's the worst kind of thing. And we talked about how we can really, what to do with these two less than ideal levels, how they could be rectified. And we talked about how in the first level, the more neutral level, all a person really needs to do is they need to just go back and relearn or repray that part. And as long as they have the right intention the second time around, they are able to naturally redeem that prayer, and it can actually elevate those prayers or that learning up to a higher level. Because also, I didn't mention this time, that basically the problem with negative intention or neutral intention, like less than ideal intention, is it doesn't allow the learning or the prayer to rise up and to be elevated into the higher realms, which is the purpose of what we want to do. So if a person has the more neutral intention, if they go back and then they have proper intention, then they can retroactively elevate all of those things. However, if a person had a more negative kind of intention, like a more selfish intention, it's not enough for them to just go back and now from now on, I'm going to have good intention. They actually have to do tshuva. They actually have to really do some sincere soul searching and really return to God in a real way, in a true, like, broken heart kind of way. And that is going to lead them to be able to elevate all of their past negative intentions. So now the Alter Rebbe this is where he starts off, and he says that, okay, but what about the person who had this more neutral intention? He's focusing on that level right now. So somebody who had this more neutral intention, they just went about things in a more habitual way or whatever. If they don't go back and now review what it is that they learned, and this time review it with the proper intention in this way of lishma, like for the sake of heaven. So until a person does this, their learning does not get elevated. Not even in the Yud Sfirot, in the 10 Sfirot, we're going to talk about this, that shine in the worlds of Yetzirah and Asiya, which are the two lower worlds. So basically, like we already learned, that it doesn't rise up. If a person does not have the right intention, it's not going to rise up to the level of Bria, and definitely not Atzilus, which are the two higher worlds. But what about the worlds of Yetzirah and Asiya, which tend to be these lower worlds? So the Alter Rebbe is saying that even in these worlds, so long as a person does not go back and review what it is that they learned and infuse that lishma aspect into it, that like learning for the sake of heaven aspect into it, it will not rise up to the 10 sfirot, the 10 spheres that shine in the worlds of these two lower worlds of Yetzirah and Asiya. So why? And why are we specifying spheros specifically? Because the spheros are godliness. And within them, the light of the Ein Sof, Baruch Hu, the infinite light of God, shines really within these 10 spheros. So as we'll learn, so we're getting a little intro to this, that every world is made up of like an inner part to it and an outer part to it. So the inner aspect of every world, like what it's really, really made up of, is these 10 spheros, these 10 attributes that we've been over them in the past. There's Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod Yesod, and Malchus. It's the 10 godly attributes, which we all have as well because we were created within the image of God. So these 10 attributes are the actual makeup, like kind of like the building blocks of each world. And now here the Alter Rebbe cites the Tikkunei Zohar, where it says that without love and fear, the Torah cannot rise to stand before God. So again, it's this idea that we need this love and fear, which is this intention that we've been talking about, in order for the Torah to rise. So this is, we'll see further on in Tanya, that this is why love and fear are called the wings, because love and fear is what allow a person's service to fly up, to get elevated, specifically to godliness. So now here's an interesting new idea that the Alter Rebbe brings up now, is he says that, however, in the case of this kind of neutral learning that we've been talking about, this like learning out of habit, even though it doesn't get elevated to the level of the spheros that are within the worlds, it actually does rise up. Where does it rise up to? It rises up to the chambers. It's called the heichalos, and to the medurin. It's the dwelling place or the abodes of these different worlds. So, and what is this? What do we mean by chambers and abodes? This is the external aspects of the worlds. This is where the angels stand. As Rabbi Chaim Vital said in the Gate of Nevuah in chapter 2, that from the Torah without intention, angels are created in the world of Yetzirah, and from the mitzvahs without intention, angels are created in the world of Asiya. And then says the Alter Rebbe, all angels are made up of matter and form. And he doesn't really elaborate on that. However, just in reading some notes on the Tanya, it's what this seems to be indicating is the idea that while here we're talking about this idea of somebody not having this ideal intention of lishma, of, for the sake of heaven. No matter what we do, anytime we're doing any kind of mitzvah, there's going to be some kind of some intention in it, some intentionality in what we're doing on some level, even if it's a more kind of neutral intention. And so this intention is the form of the mitzvah or the Torah versus the actual action itself is the matter of the mitzvah or the Torah. So that's what creates these angels. So that's category number one. So basically, to sum up that first thing, again, when we do mitzvahs or when we study Torah with a more neutral intention, so it's not the highest ideal intention of for the sake of heaven in this high way, but it's just kind of by rote, it's our habit, whatever it is, that does not allow our Torah mitzvahs to rise up to the spheros within any of the worlds, not even the spheros of the worlds of Yetzirah and Asiya. However, it does rise up to the hechalos and the medurim, to the abodes, to the chambers and the abodes of these lower two worlds, the world of Yetzirah and the world of Asiya. And what this translates to mean is that it creates malachim, it creates angels in these two worlds. And from the Torah without kavana, this is where the angels of Yetzirah come from. And the mitzvahs without kavana, this is where this creates the angels in Asiya. So that's category number one. Now we get into category number two, which is those people that do not have a neutral intention when they study Torah or when they serve God, but they actually have a more negative intention. So it's really not lishma. It's like these people are learning in order to be a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, or that type of thing. It's for self-aggrandizement. In these cases of these kind of people, their Torah does not rise up at all, not even to the chambers or to the abodes of the holy angels, but it rather stays down here in this physical world, which is the abode of the klipos, of those husks that conceal God. And now the Alter Rebbe brings a footnote where he says in brackets, he says, this is like what is written in the Zohar in part 3 on page 31b and page 121b. And I will not attempt to say the Aramaic here, but so basically the translation is that the spoken word ascends on high and pierces the heavens and evokes what it evokes. If the word is good, a word of Torah or the like, it evokes good. See there, the Alter Rebbe says, and also on page 105a, from a word of Torah, a voice is formed which rises. And also on page 168b, the voices of Torah and prayer ascend on high and pierce the heaven. So these are all proofs that the Alter Rebbe is bringing of this idea that when we have the right intention, when we study Torah and engage in Torah study in the proper way, in a good way, then it causes this Torah study to rise up. And so too with prayer also. And then one more site, and now we go back to the regular text, and then the Alter Rebbe again cites the Zohar here, and he says that the Zohar explains on the pasuk. There's a pasuk here from Kohelet, chapter 1, verse 3, which says, "Ma yetaron la'adam b'chol amalo she'amol tachat hashemesh." So that literally means, what profit has a man of all his toil that he labors under the sun? And the Alter Rebbe says that the way that the Zohar explains this is that the Zohar says that even with the toil of Torah, if one does it for his own glory, it is considered as if it's like labor under the sun, and there's no profit in it. And then also there's a teaching in Psachim, in the Gemara in Psachim, page 50a, which says, "Ashrei mi sheba lechan v'talmudo be'edo," which literally means, happy is he who arrives here on high with his Torah study in his hand. Meaning to say, says the Alter Rebbe, this is referring to the fact that it's good for the Torah study to rise up. So meaning that when the person ascends on high, like after they pass away, it's good for them to have their Torah in their hand, meaning that it didn't stay down here in the physical world. So just to sum up this part, the Alter Rebbe is basically saying that it's unlike the more neutral intention, which rises up to, which causes the Torah and prayer to rise up to the level of the hechalos, to the chambers in these different worlds. If somebody has negative intention, then this does not allow the Torah to rise at all. It stays down here, the Torah and the mitzvahs. It stays here in the physical world, which is definitely not the intention. We actually want to have it rise up. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to bring up something which might seem to be a paradox, but he's going to kind of reconcile it and explain how all of this intentionality fits in and the true importance and why it's so important for us to work at elevating our Torah and Mitzvahs in this kind of way. So the Alter Rebbe says that even though that God and Torah are one, so we've learned about this previously, meaning that God's will is one with him. Him and his will are one, right? They're united. And we've also learned about this idea that God fills all the worlds equally. Nevertheless, the worlds are not equal in terms of level. So what makes the worlds different? Because it's like if God fills all the worlds and God is everywhere equally and there's nothing devoid of him, what do we mean? How could we even have this idea of separate worlds, of different worlds and different levels and things like that? So the Alter Rebbe says that the difference between these worlds is not in terms of actually God, the extent to which God is present there. The difference is in terms of the recipients. The difference is in terms of what it is that the recipients are experiencing. And there's two aspects to this. The first aspect is that the higher worlds, the higher levels, receive more radiance, a greater radiance to an infinite degree greater than what the lower realms are receiving. And the second is that these higher beings in these higher places receive this radiance without the same garments and masks and without so many concealments, like without so many coverings like the lower realms do. And when we talk about our world, this lower physical world, it's very, very low in both of these ways because the radiance that we receive here is extremely constricted to the nth degree. We receive this radiance in a very, very constricted way. And this is why it's so material and physical. Like we really, really do not perceive God here. And similarly, it's filled with many garments and many, many masks, many concealments, like so many cloaks and things like that, to the point that it is be able to be vested in the klipas noga, in this luminous husk, to be able to give life to all things that are pure in this world, and in a general sense, this encompasses the animal soul that allows every person to speak. This is the speaking, like the animating force in every person. So let's just sum that up a little bit here. So basically, the Alter Rebbe is saying it's that while it is true that God is everywhere and in everything, the perception is different. So again, going back to that analogy that I brought up in the beginning of that video, while it's true that the gorilla is always there in the video, not everybody is seeing the gorilla. And here we have an extra thing that is added that's not in that analogy, where not even everybody is receiving the same radiance. So the experience that we have, depending on which level of world we're at, is different in two aspects. Aspect number one is the radiance is more or less intense depending on the level. And the second way it's different is the veils through which we translate this radiance is going to be very different. So the lower the world is, the less radiance we receive and the more it's covered up. And so when we're here in our physical world, it's extremely limited. The amount of radiance we're getting is very, very, very constricted. So it's still here, but we're experiencing it in a very constricted way. And it's filled up with veils. And we know that these veils, these concealments, this is where the klipas noga comes from. This is where those husks come from, which are responsible for the creation of all things in this physical world that are more neutral in nature, including our animating or animal soul. The terms are used interchangeably. It's like the animating force inside of our body. And so now to bring it back to this whole discussion we've been having about learning Torah and praying and all of this kind of stuff. So when a person is learning Torah or praying without any intention, so just like in this more neutral way, even though the letters are holy. And so when it comes to holy letters, the klipas noga in the animal soul does not serve as this veil, this concealment to hide the holiness of God, which is vested within them, the way that it conceals godliness within the animal soul. So it's not the same kind of concealment. Like things that are really holy in this world are not in this neutral category. They don't conceal God in the same way. So God is more revealed in the letters of Torah and of prayer, which is not the case when a person just engages in like regular kind of like speaking, just about like stupid things, like vain speech, basically idle chatter. And so too in the animating force that's found in the different animals, even if they're more pure animals. And so even though God is found in all of these things, because again, there's no place that God is devoid of, nevertheless, it's described as being stimo de chol stimin, which literally translates to mean the most hidden one of all hidden one. And he's called the God that hides. And so too, the radiance which comes out and the vitality which comes out from God is concealed in these various different garments and in these various masks, like these veils, many veils that are very intense, and to the point that it can actually be vested in this garment of noga, of klipas noga, which is not the case, again, with the letters of Torah and Tefillah, because and not only that is it not, or the letters of Torah and prayer not vested within the klipas noga, but actually the klipas noga actually transforms. They allow, like when we speak words of Torah and prayer, we actually, through this, we are able to transform the klipas noga into good, and it becomes holy. Because again, remember we talked about this thing, how we all kind of have the power. The idea of klipas noga is it can go either way, and if we can use our words to speak bad, God forbid, like gossip and things like that. We can use them to speak more neutral kind of things, or we can use our words to speak holy things. And when we use our words, when we use our mouths to speak holy things, we actually elevate those very same words to be encompassed in holiness, because klipas noga can go either way. Nevertheless, the radiance that's found within them, which comes from God's holiness, is in a way of tzimtzum to the nth degree. So it is still extremely constricted. Why? Because nevertheless, even though it's true that the words themselves are very holy and true godliness, and they don't conceal in the same way, but nevertheless, the voice and the speech is physical. So we can't get away from the fact that the tools that we use to speak these words are physical. However, prayer with intention and Torah with intention, like the true intention, the ideal intention of lishma, like for the sake of heaven, in this case, then the intention becomes vested within the letters of speech, since it is the source for them, because it is because of this intention that we're speaking these words. Because when a person really has the right intention, when they have the intention that they are praying for the sake of heaven, it's like, okay, so that means the whole reason why they're moving their mouth and they're moving their lips is for the sake of heaven. So the source of the speech now becomes this holy thing. And thus, because the source of the speech is this holy thing, he is able now to elevate these things to their place in the Yud spheros of Yetzirah or Bria. So the 10 spheros of Yetzirah and Bria. So now it can get elevated to that more inner place, to the building blocks of these worlds, not just to the external aspects of them, because it is with the true intention of love and fear, of whether it's the intellectual love and fear or the more innate love and fear, which we talked about in the previous chapter, how there's two different types of holy intention a person can have. And so thus it's able to have, like, when a person does have this proper intention, then this is why they are able to elevate their Torah and mitzvahs and their prayer to these higher realms in a true sense, in the spheros of these higher realms. And in these spheres of these higher realms are revealed the light of the Ein Sof, which is the supernal will that is vested within the letters of Torah that he learns with their intention, or the prayer with intention, or mitzvahs with intention, with a great, great, great radiance to an infinite degree, which is something that cannot actually be revealed here in this physical world, not even a little bit, until the end of times, when the world will be elevated from its physicality and the glory of God will be revealed, as is explained above at length. Like we talked about this previously, this idea that how in the future everything will be revealed in a true way. So that's the end of this section. So again, just to sum up, basically there are 3 levels of intention and 3 levels of elevation or lack of elevation that could happen. So we'll start with the lowest and we'll go to the highest. So the lowest form is when a person performs Torah and mitzvahs from negative intention, like self-aggrandizement, self-glory, that kind of thing. Then their Torah and mitzvahs do not get elevated at all. They're stuck down here in this physical world, and they never get elevated unless a person does tshuva. They don't go anywhere. Then we have the more neutral intentions. Then we have people who, you study, you pray, but you're not totally conscious of God. You didn't arouse this love and fear of God not in an innate kind of way, arousing your innate love and fear, not in an intellectual capacity. You just kind of go through the motions, and who knows what you're thinking about. It's kind of more neutral. In that case, your Torah and prayer does get elevated, but it doesn't get elevated into the inner aspects of the world, and not at all even to those higher worlds. It gets elevated to the external chambers of the lower worlds, which are Asiya and Yetzirah. And this translates as the angels of those worlds. And then we have the higher form of intention. This higher form of intention is when a person arouses within them the innate love of God that every Jew has, or on an even higher level, they are able to now arouse a more intellectually based love and fear of God through really meditating and contemplating on the greatness of God. And this will allow them to have this more passionate feeling of God. And in both of these instances, then the amazing thing about the intention, what the intention can produce in this case, is it can actually elevate their Torah and Mitzvahs to the inner aspect of these worlds, the building blocks of these worlds, which are the spheres of the world, the 10 spheres of the world. So that is it for today. And we will continue with this chapter tomorrow. We're going to have a footnote tomorrow that we'll get into, and then a few more days of this chapter, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.